Welcome back to the other side of change only on the Black Star Network. I'm Brea Baker here with my girl, Jamira Burley, and today's conversation is a celebration of Indigenous Peoples Month and the solidarity between Black and Native people and how we can and need to have it in this moment.
Yeah, Trump is already trying to undo and revert back to a celebration of Christopher Columbus so that there is no better time to honor and learn about the first people who were truly here before he came to try to call this place home. Today, we're going to do some myth busting, uncover barriers to our solidarity, and make the case for why unity is not only nice to have, but also necessary for our joint and united survival.
Preach, preach.
But first, the headlines.
The headlines, well, I tried to have positive headlines today, and I don't got it. I don't got it today. Right now, I feel like what my timeline has been consumed with is Hurricane Melissa. Jamaica has been hit so hard and is continuing to be hit. And right now, most of the storm is also traveling to Cuba. It's kind of downgraded, but just seeing the visuals coming out of there are really, really horrible to witness. I think it's also such a really tragic case study of things we've talked about in the past around disaster capitalism, and this idea that most of the visuals I'm seeing are from tourists who are on resorts and are expecting to still be served by people who live on this island full time, who this is their home, who do not get to flee and go back to anywhere else, but are still having to work and take care of other people. And it's just, just such a reminder of like who gets prioritized, who has to still show up for other people, even at the expense of themselves.
Absolutely. I mean, I know so many people when you live in New York or you know a whole bunch of folks from New York, you know, they have relatives who are in the Caribbean who are being decimated right now. And the implications are massive. And I think what's even more unique about this particular storm under this particular administration is that under normal administration, normal functioning governments, we know that there is more likely to be aid sent to those countries to enable for them to recover, to be able to bring American citizens back home, or even just be able to eliminate some of the increased devastation that will happen due to the lack of electricity, the lack of food getting to the island. But that's not going to happen, which I think is only going to make the implications of this storm even more devastating to those parents, those families. And you're right? All of the videos that I'm seeing are from tourists. All of the voices that I'm seeing being elevated are from tourists. And the lack of humanity given to the folks who are native to that land is devastating, which I think lends to our overarching topic for this show, right? Like how we value people who are native to lands and not use their places as just rest stops for our own pleasure, but we honor not only them, but also the land that they help to cultivate and take care of for generations. And hopefully just to come.
Right, exactly. It's going to be a hard recovery space. But again, like you said, it's the people who are local and native to a place that are never going to give up on that place. And so I hope to see a lot of support for Jamaican folks and like Jamaican-led businesses and making sure that this doesn't become a land grab where international places swoop in and buy up everything, but that Jamaicans are able to be at the center. I mean, not to make light of anything, but I also saw some threads and tweets of like, listen, all the people who love Caribbean culture when it's time for Carnival, when they want to put on an accent, Drake, and whatever, like need to be putting their dollars in their wallets where it counts right now, because this is what it is. It's not just exotifying this, like this is real life people.
Exactly. We can't just uplift them and celebrate them when it's convenient for our own entertainment or our own pockets. We also have to make sure that these folks have the resource that they need to be able to not only survive, but thrive. And now it's time for celebrities who normally love to take up attention in the right way.
Preach.
Yeah. So unfortunately, in the escalation of really bad news, we all heard that Amazon is laying off thousands of employees this week, 14,000 so far, with the anticipation that more will come. But Amazon is not the only, right? We also have about 1,800 from Target Corporation. They're eliminating additional 800. Paramount has eliminated close to 1,000, potentially increasing that to 2,000. You have General Motors, you have Charter Communication, all doing layoffs. And all of this is happening in the midst of of economic downturn. I'm sorry. Also, you have Meta Platforms eliminating an entire section within their organization, 318 jobs that are part of an 800 overhaul division. And yeah, this is on top of the thousands of jobs that have been eliminated at the federal and state level, in the public and private sector. And I don't know, this feels like we are entering a time in which the average American will not be able to afford to survive. We knew, but before Donald Trump, that most Americans couldn't afford a $400 emergency. And, what's one of the most irritating things about these stories that a lot of companies are alluding to, the reason why they're doing these downturns or these layoffs, these mass layoffs, is because of AI, because AI is making jobs or eliminating jobs. And when they initially sold us the idea of AI, they sold us with the idea that it would actually give time back to consumers and employees that enables for us to have a full life. And now they're saying, actually, we don't need you anymore. And I'm just wondering, if you eliminate all the jobs and all the workers for those jobs, who is actually going to buy your product? Who is actually going to participate in the economy? Because that equation doesn't make sense to me yet.
Yeah, I don't think they have a strategy for that either. I think their goal short term is just to price everyone out, to make there be more billionaires, to build a trillionaire class for the first time.
Yeah.
But then really asking yourselves, well, then who are we actually marketing to? Who is going to keep this economy circular? Is the goal just for billionaires to be buying from billionaires and to just have us working forever, and to not have to need us? But it feels really short-sighted. It feels very like, what is the end game here? And as you said, I mean, in the midst of a continued government shutdown, all of these layoffs, I think it's very safe to say that this recession is going from bad to worse. And I'm scared to see how bad it's going to get.
It's going to get real bad.
Yeah.
Real bad.
Well, speaking of bad to worse, this is not necessarily new news, but there's just been continued fallout from it. This racist group chat from the Young Republicans group has been also mind-blowing, because I think we're in a time where so many people believe that we can wait out some of the worst things that are happening, just wait out Trump's term, or, wait out these old people dying. And what we're seeing is that younger people are becoming increasingly radicalized towards the right, specifically younger white people and young men are being radicalized towards the right. And so this group chat from Young Republicans really puts that on Front Street. I mean, you have some of the most racist, sexist, anti-Semitic, I have a Hitler side in me, and, we're going to send these people to the gas chamber, and, talking about banning Kwanzaa and Juneteenth and MLK Day, just like insane stuff coming from people who are in their 20s and early 30s, who are positioned to be the future of the Republican Party. And so I think, this idea that Trump's version of republicanism is fringe is getting proven wrong time and time again. And this group chat is such proof of that. So honestly, it's good to be exposed so that we can know what we're up against. Yeah. But I think seeing it really makes it visceral in a way that people did not expect.
Yeah, two things I will say about this is, I think part of the reason why we're here, I mean, in this space in American culture, in the world culture, right, where we see the rise of racism and anti-Semitic rhetoric, as well as Islamic phobia, all of these are raising anti-Blackness, right, all on the rise, is because we did not punish the Confederacy, and we did not label the KKK as a terrorist organization, which they are. So we have enabled for these folks to assume that it is a safe landing ground for them to operate the way that they do, because they will never be held accountable. And the fact that you have Republican leadership, kind of subtly brushing this off as is to say that these are just kids. I don't know any Black kids making jokes about mass deportation, making jokes about mass murder, making jokes about Holocaust. I don't know these people. I don't know minority groups doing these things. This seems something only to be in the fringes of the Republican Party. And the idea that they could just brush this off as if these are just young people, when there are literally Black kids who have been shot down in their neighborhoods for playing with a toy gun. Okay. Why are the only people that are allowed to be kids and their mistakes not to be held against them for the rest of their lives are white Republicans when there are not Black children in this country that are still dealing with the stigma of being labeled as violent for the simple fact of growing in a specific neighborhood or having a certain type of skin tone. And that is the reality of America. And it's because we have never truly punished the people who have upheld and perpetuate a very racist, white supremacist type of ideology in this country. They've just been hiding in plain sight for so long, right? Even the CIA and the FBI came out years ago saying that the KKK was infiltrating police forces.
Yeah.
And now we are seeing that come out full force with ICE, taking the lead on that. What a time, what a time, what a time.
What a time. But you're so right. It's that refusal to address the thing head on. And again, just hoping something will just like evaporate away without us having to be intentional about it. And it's like, no, we've got to address this right here and now. And we can't even, like infiltrating, but now it's like these groups are identical to one another. ICE is police, is military, is white supremacists, like and they're not invested in making that any different. So it's going to always be that way.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. So the final headline of the day is, the states are now suing the federal government, the Trump administration, specifically regarding the government shutdown affecting SNAP benefits. Now, for those who don't know about SNAP benefits, it's called different things depending on the state, which is one of the reasons why the Republicans have been able to lie about SNAP and things like Medicare for all. Or healthcare for all, right? Or the Obamacare, is because it's labeled different things in different states. But we know the SNAP benefits will potentially impact more than 40 million Americans. And we're talking to everyone from children, people with disabilities, people who are caregivers. We're talking about people who work full time and still are not able to keep food on their table. They are going to be impacted by the fact that the government is shut down and they're trying to limit people's access to SNAP benefits. Now, I grew up on food stamps, and so many people that I know grew up on food stamps, and that might be the only thing standing between a child and their ability to get their nutrients that they need for the day, to be able to be a child and go to school and operate as a functioning human being. And now we are potentially starving those people. So shout out to the states that are not taking no for an answer and are using the power of the pen, the power of the attorney generals and the governors within those 25 Democratic-led states, because Republicans are being, silent. The Republican governors who are, a lot of their people, stakeholders within their state, are going to be deeply impacted. We know that a lot of red states are well below the poverty line. And yet only 25 Democratic governors and attorney generals are actually challenging the federal government's ability to ice out everyday Americans' ability to get access to food. So I'm curious to see how the story will continue to develop.
Yeah, 1 million. I am excited for us to see, though, for all of this, like states' rights versus federal rights, to see which states are showing up in the ways that matter. That it's Governor Kathy Hochul of New York and Governor Newsom of California and other states like that who are really filling in the gap and saying, we're going to fund it. And I believe that the Trump administration is also being sued because the USDA has discretionary funding to use for SNAP and other programs. It's agriculture, food, like get food into the hands that need it, and they're not using it. So the Republicans are trying to frame this shutdown as a Democrats' problem, but Republicans control every aspect of our federal government right now. There are workarounds to make sure that even as Republicans and Democrats hash out the rest of things, that people can still eat, and they're not using that power. And I think that needs to be we can't let up on that and let that get ignored. So I hope that people don't get amnesia. People remember this when election day comes around next week, next year in 2028, and to remember that they're it's all talking points for people. They're not.
Yeah, and I think one thing the last thing I'll point out is that, I think it's very easy for folks to be like, well, I'm not on SNAP. This doesn't impact me. We are all on subsidized food. The federal government subsidized farmers. The federal government subsidized different aspects of the food industry that enables for us to get our food at a relatively good price, right? And that's stretching it. And it's because prices in the United States are just astronomical. But imagine what will happen to the food industry and the economy when you have 40 million Americans who are not participating in the economy because they cannot get access to food stamps to be able to support their bill. Like, how many businesses will be impacted? How many households will be impacted? We are not living in an isolated world in which our individual lives are separated from the collective. all of our lives are intertwined, and it's going to come to heads when you have 42 million Americans who rely on federal programs from low-income communities who are going to go hungry.
Say that, girl. Say that, girl. And I do think it's also the interdependence thing, because whether you think of yourself as someone relying on these services or not, you live in community with people who are. And whether you know that they are or not, there are families, there are educators, there are children, there are faith leaders, there are activists, there are artists, there are people who need this to survive. And when we are stripped of the basic things that we need to survive, it creates desperation. And I think that this is where this conversation of the best way to shape public safety is to make sure people's needs are met. Because if I'm hungry and my kids are hungry, don't expect me to not be stealing. Don't expect me to not be cutting corners. Don't expect, like, my kids got to eat. I've got to have electricity. I've got to have, it's getting cold outside. And so I think that we really need to ask ourselves, how far are we willing to let it go? How desperate are we willing to let people get before we step in and say, this is the job of the richest country in the world's safety net. And if they're not going to do it, then people are going to turn to their own methods, and we can't blame them, because we love to judge people for doing things that we would absolutely do if we were in those shoes. And let's not let it get there. So anyway, as we said, things are getting really rough around here. We're going to need solidarity more than ever between all groups of people, not just Black and Native folks. But I do think we're coming up on a time where our groups especially are going to be under attack in these continued culture wars, whitewashing, which we're going to get into in a future episode. And we just have to ask ourselves, like, what are we willing to do to keep each other safe? So we'll get into
what are we willing to do?
Yeah, what are we willing to do? Because we know the government's not going to do it for us, or not every aspect of the government. So when we come back from this short break, we'll dig into all of those things. But again, you're watching The Other Side of Change only on Black Star Network.
Hello, I'm Isaac Hayes III, founder and CEO of Fanbase, and I'm here with a very important message. We are at a turning point in the Black community where we must have equity in the apps we use that scale to billions of dollars. But this time, we own the infrastructure, we own the culture, and we shape the future. And Fanbase is the future. Fanbase combines the free functionality of Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube into an all-in-one platform built for the evolution of social media and monetization. With over 1.4 million users, that's real proof that we are shifting the conversation of tech ownership and equity for creators. So right now, I want you to go to startengine.com/fanbase and invest today. The minimum to invest is $399. That gets you 60 shares of stock in Fanbase at $665 a share. This marks a turning point in Black ownership of social media. If we don't take this opportunity to own social media right now, we will always be customers to our own creations. And that can't go on. So once again, go to startengine.com/fanbase and invest today. We must own the platforms where our voices live, our stories matter, and where our culture drives the world. Thank you.
Welcome back to The Other Side of Change. In this segment, we're honoring Indigenous people, their inherent brilliance, creativity, resilience, and all we can accomplish hand in hand.
No, absolutely. It's important to make it clear that Indigenous people are not a monolith. Prior to colonialization and genocide, which created a need for Native people to unite under one umbrella term, there were thousands of distinct Indigenous nations and tribes with each of their own names, languages, cultures, faith traditions, and histories.
Right. And what they shared in common has been this respect for the natural environment as stewards of the land. Because for centuries, Native nations from coast to coast have protected waterways, maintained clean air, prevented ecological destruction, and just existed in this like symbiotic balance. with the environment around them. And considering the current state of climate change, man-made environmental racism, we can learn a lot more than a thing or two from these ancestral practices and value systems.
Absolutely. If Indigenous people had remained the predominant landowners and tenders, we'll be in a very different place right now. Unfortunately for all of us, European colonizers destroyed everything in sight in the name of greed. And we're seeing the same thing happen over and over again. They stole Indigenous land, created treaties that they knew would break, and outlaw Indigenous practices to prevent rebellion against their capitalist ways. In fact, this is how some Indigenous nations became engaged in slavery in the first place, to keep us from fighting alongside one another. White settlers forced some of the largest Native leaders into compliance by making them enslave Black people as a part of their practice.
Yeah, and this is important to name because I think that this is a narrative that gets used as a wedge between our groups all the time to keep us from fighting alongside one another. But while Black people were being enslaved and tortured on plantations, it's not that all Indigenous folks were participants in that or on sidelines of that. And we have to reject this like blanketing statement there. Indigenous people were being pushed out of their homes and lands, dealing with their own torture and versions of enslavement and family separation to make space for the expansion of slavery. So the demand for one created the demand for other. And in that way, it's like our oppression became linked, but so did our resistance. And that is what I feel like we need to lean in, not just Indigenous Peoples Month, but all year round, especially next year when this country is celebrating the 250th anniversary. Many Native tribes and nations refused to participate in slavery, openly attacked white churches, plantations, slave catchers, because they were abolitionists. They fought alongside us for our freedom. They co-created communities called maroon societies where Black and Native people lived, worked, and loved side by side. And those models are things that we can lean on still today.
Absolutely. Exactly. I mean, it's so many more stories than we give credit to that highlight of our collaboration working together. And surprisingly, we know many of those stories have been buried by our society because they don't want to see us work in solidarity with each other. They want to continue to divide and conquer us, playing us in real time and gaslighting us to our faces about the true history of this country and ways in which that we can support each other to prevent the continuous history of, disenfranchising, oppression, and abuse.
Right, exactly. But again, we have these models that we can lean on of how we have fought side by side. And I'm not just talking about during enslavement and original land theft and settler colonialism, like even during the 20th century civil rights movements. Assata Shakur and many Black Panthers fought alongside Leonard Peltier and American Indian movement activists. Angela Davis marched with Mohawk Chief Moses David in response to the massacre at Wounded Knee. Comedian Dick Gregory participated in fish-ins, which were modeled after Black-led sit-ins at lunch counters by student, organizers with SNCC. Stokely Carmichael gave speeches about justice and land back for Native peoples. Like the list goes on and on. So this idea that we can't fight alongside one another is ahistorical. All of our favorite revolutionaries, the people whose quotes you love to use, understood that we can achieve so much more together. And it's not just about those selfish reasons, but just because we see ourselves in one another and we should fight for one another.
I mean, and also if we think about it, the only reason why we're here and have the vast majority of rights that we have is because of that solidarity. And that's what the establishment is afraid of. What is possible when we stand together, when we insist on justice for everyone and not just a few. So much, everything, we'll actually get the reparations that we need. We'll actually get the land back and everything else we deserve from the richest country in the world that is only wealthy because of the oppression that exists on our backs. It is why they say our liberation is bound to one another. In defiance of that, the people in power plant seeds of ignorance, at best to divide, to distrust us, and at worst, hoping that we'll fight each other to distract us from who's the real enemy and who can continue to create these systems of oppression.
Say that, yes. And the beautiful thing is that when we know better, we do better. I don't blame people for not knowing these histories. And I think it's easy to be insular and say, as a Black person, I'm only going to fight for people who look like me because we're up against so much. But we are being intentionally kept from these stories and narratives of solidarity because it is a threat to the status quo. It is a threat to the empire. And we have so much more information at our disposal now. We have books that we can read, social media accounts we can follow, organizations organizations we can show up with and learn from, our shared histories and our modern day fights and what solidarity requires. Like, we have access to all of that, and we owe it to ourselves, not just one another, but to ourselves, to be intentional about seeking out this information, to building relationships that are being, kept from us, because it only gets worse, especially as books are being banned, as narratives are being rewritten. Like, we have to be the ones to keep these stories alive. And coincidentally, we come from communities who are story keepers, are storytellers. So we have to continue to pass them down and reject the individualism that says, I'm only showing up for me and mine, and you and yours got to do it on your own. Like, that's not how we're going to get free.
Yeah. And I mean, if you let the Trump administration tell it, Native American people only exist as characters, right? And that Black people are undeserving of having a seat at the table. This is not only his belief of his administration, but also the belief of many of the people who voted for him, which is why his administration is constantly talking about bringing back Columbus Day, reverting racist sports team mascots, pushing Black people out of hard-fought positions of power, and attacking DEI, book bans inclusive of curriculum that really represents the true history of this country. That is what they're afraid of, and so much more. And we must insist on showing the authenticity and demanding our seat at the table to ensure that we're bringing everyone along, and not just the people who look like us, but also the people who are suffering alongside us.
Yeah, because when we do, we make history, and there is, a lot to lament, but there's also a lot to celebrate. Like Sharice Davis and Deb Haaland becoming the first 2 Native women elected to Congress, and Haaland going on to also be the first Native American to serve as a cabinet secretary. And, shameless plug, she's now running for governor of New Mexico, by the way. We were shouting out New Mexico a while ago as a state who did universal child care. And I think there's so much more that can be done under her leadership. But there are many, many others, including the first Native American to travel to space, Nicole Mann, and Keith Harper, the first Native American to be U.S. ambassador to the UN. Like, there are wins for us to be, honoring and uplifting.
Yeah, and even in the cultural space, right? Like, you have the Mohican tribe became the first to own a professional sports team when they purchased a women's NBA team. You have the Connecticut Suns. You have the Sam Bradford of the Cherokee Nation became the first Native American to win the Heisman Trophy. You have Lily Gladstone is the first Native American to win a Golden Globe, winner among many of our other histories and accolades, right? You also have Joy Joy is the first Native American U.S. poet laureate in history. So there's so many wins across the spectrum that I think emulates not only the qualifications, but the inspiration and the talent that exists within the Native American indigenous populations that are influenced by Black and Brown folks. And that is where the solidarity also shows itself, is how do we take our cultures and merge them together to really show a beautiful story of the evolution of America.
Right, exactly. And we have to both celebrate these wins, but also acknowledge how much continued work is needed and recognize that none of us are free until all of us are free, that Black and Native history and our futures are going to be intertwined. And instead of running from that, we can run towards it and see all the possibilities there. So in a moment, we're going to be joined by my brilliant friend, Kyle, who's an Afro-Indigenous scholar, incredible author, hilarious human being, who's going to come here and help us understand exactly just the way that our solidarity needs to be real and embodied and not theoretical. He has a book coming out that I'm so excited about, and that's going to dig into this more. But you're watching The Other Side of Change only on the Black Star Network. So stay with us.
They said the quiet part out loud. Black votes are a threat, so they erased them. After the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, Republican legislatures moved fast. New voter ID laws, polling place shutdowns, purges of Black voters from the rolls. Trump's Justice Department didn't stop it, they joined in. In 2018, his DOJ backed Ohio's voter purge system, a scheme that disproportionately erased Black voters. Their goal, erase Black votes and political power. Yeah, that happened. These are the kinds of stories that we cover every day on Roland Martin Unfiltered. Subscribe on YouTube and download the Black Star Network app. So support fact-based independent journalism that centers African Americans and the issues that matter to our community.
Welcome back to The Other Side of Change, only on the Black Star Network. As promised, we are joined now by Kyle T. Mays, an Afro-Indigenous scholar from Saginaw Chippewa Nation. He's a writer, professor, U.S. history, urban studies, race relations, contemporary pop culture, all the things. In addition to teaching at UCLA, Kyle is the author of many books and anthology chapters. Some of my favorites are An Afro-Indigenous History of the United States, but he's also contributed to 400 Souls, A Community History of African America, which was edited by Keisha Blaine and Ibram Kendi. And his work broadly explores three questions. What is the relationship between Blackness and indigeneity? How does dispossession in cities shape the lives of Black and Indigenous people? And how can we imagine and put into praxis a world in the aftermath of settler colonialism and white supremacy? Kyle, welcome to The Other Side of Change, friend.
What's up? How y'all doing?
What's up with you? Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
This is, many times, many people can think these topics are pretty complicated. So I'm happy that you're here to help us really kind of examine a topic that I think oftentimes doesn't get as much shine on the mainstream. So, from your point of view, when you look at the landscape of Black and Indigenous rights, what stands out to you regarding what are the barriers to getting us to a place where we can continue to show up for each other in a way that's authentic and not reactionary? Only in moments of truly destitute, right? Of what we're seeing right now, but every day.
I think first, one of the key things people have to understand is that U.S. democracy was founded through what? Two things: the enslavement of African peoples and the dispossession of indigenous peoples. Mm-hmm. And you have to understand that in order to talk about how we can come together. In other words, I think we need to do a better job of understanding each other's histories. For example, when we teach the Civil War, right? The Civil War is about what? I know in the South sometimes they still stand states' rights, but the Civil War was about Black people getting their freedom. Related to that, happening simultaneously, was the dispossession and genocide against indigenous peoples. For example, the Homestead Act happens in what year? 1862. Mm-hmm. Right? So these things are happening at the same time. The Dakota 38 men hanged in Minnesota happens in 1862. So we have to do a much better job of talking about these things simultaneously and trying to understand, for example, the relationship at various moments between Black freedom and sometimes indigenous subjugation or indigenous sovereignty and sometimes Black subjugation.
Nice. Yeah, that's a really important point. And I think that's what makes things sticky, is that sometimes we zero in on only one of those narratives and don't realize how it's been incentivized across the board. That the moment we were fighting alongside one another, it was like, oh no, we got to make each other complicit in one another's subjugation. So, I'll talk to Black people who will say, well, indigenous folks were enslaving us. And I'm like, okay, well, y'all not talking about Buffalo Soldiers though. There were Black people who were serving in the U.S. military who were clearing indigenous land and being a part of that because it was one of the few opportunities for us to. So anyway, we can get into continued history.
No, but it goes to show the waters are muddled intentionally, right? People from the Black and Indigenous communities are not waking up one day and saying, how can I subjugate the other, right? Oftentimes they are operating within systems of oppression deliberately set up to disadvantage both of us. Exactly.
And I think that's why the unity becomes so disincentivized. But when I introduced you as Afro-Indigenous, and I want to break that down as well, because this can be, I feel like there's extremes to this. There's the Hotep extreme that's Black people were the first, everybody got Indian in their family. But then there's the other extreme that's our communities had nothing to do with one another, and I don't even understand where this comes together. And so can you break down Afro-Indigeneity for listeners who are not familiar with the term.
Yeah, so there's like a few different iterations of it. So the term indigeneity is basically like describing one's identity and also their cultural identity, being indigenous, and also one's relationship to land and the relationship to a particular people. Like I think Black people, for example, what I would call Black indigeneity, related to being Afro-indigeneity, as I'll use myself as an example. My mom's Black American. My dad is Saginaw Chippewa. That's an Afro-Indigenous identity. You also have African peoples from the continent who express indigenous practices, cultures. Maybe they're not on their land, but I would consider those people Afro-Indigenous. So there's like a few different iterations of that. You have Afro-Indigenous peoples, for example, who might be like Black and Taino in the Caribbean as well, or Arawak as well. So there's these different iterations, but like you're right, Brea, there's some people who take this to the extreme to say Black people are the original people. I remember someone posted me on Instagram saying I was a part of the Copper Tribe. I ain't never heard of no Copper Tribe in my life. But this is a part of a history that has been erased. And, it's also the shame of slavery, I think, where people just don't want to admit that not everyone has a Cherokee grandparent. There are living, breathing Afro-Indigenous people like myself who continue to have a relationship with their people and continue to practice. But don't get it twisted. I am cool being just as Black or just as Native in any sort of space. Like, I'm not spelling out either one, but these are the complexities of identity that we need to talk about more and have a better understanding of what those things mean.
Yeah, it reminds me of, and I can think back to like middle school and high school when like the girls would get their hair straightened and everyone would be like, well, what are you? Right. And they'd be like, oh, I have a little bit of Cherokee in me. And I think a lot of that is rooted in anti-Blackness, right? Like it's rooted in this idea that if you look different than what they think you are, then somehow you must be ethnic of some sort or exotic.
Right.
And it's really frustrating because it just goes to show you that one of the reasons why racism and white supremacy has operated so well in this country is the lack of knowledge of our history and the complexity of Blackness and the complexity of Indigenous folks' history and how we show up in the world and the spectrum of what we could look like and how we could sound and the history that we represent. You wrote a book that was widely celebrated, the Afro-Indigenous history of America. What do you think most people misunderstand about not only the contribution of Black and Indigenous folks, but also in how it has shaped its inability to be celebrated or recognized at the national level has really put us in a place of not knowing who we are and allowing folks to kind of rewrite our history every single day?
Yeah, there's a few things. I mean, one, I think people don't have a fundamental understanding of how pervasive settler colonialism is. Yeah. Settler colonialism, for people who don't know, it's that when, for example, Europeans came to the Americas with the intent to settle and create a new society. Related to that is these narratives of dispossession. In other words, they create stories to erase Native peoples. Right. And it's foundational to our education. One exercise I always do with students is on the first day is tell me about the Indigenous peoples wherever you grew up. And to be clear, even for international students, there are Indigenous peoples there too. And what you often hear is they don't know, they're uncertain. And I remind them, it's not your fault. This is a product of colonialism, because the point of settler colonialism is to continue to justify the stealing of land and occupation of Indigenous land. And unfortunately, because of that, some of our Black folks get caught up into that too. And think about even how we talk about Native peoples as Native peoples, the genocide that happened, all these things happened in the past, instead of thinking about colonialism existing in the present. So another question I'll ask students, does the United States, does it have the right to exist as a legitimate democracy and nation state, given that it's still a settler colony? And that's an important thing that all of us have to really recognize. Yeah. And this is why understanding tribal sovereignty is important for all of us.
Yeah. And I think that this is so key also to the way that we think of international moments, like, Palestine right now, and recognizing that a lot of to your point about the narrative, is to make it seem as there was never anyone there before us. And so we didn't take anything from anybody, and everything we're doing is noble. And why are you against me being there? And it's to like feign this innocence.
Yeah.
But it can, when it's successful, when that narrative is successful, it keeps us confused about, well, am I on the right side here? And what is this really about? And all of that. Especially, I mentioned before, next year is the 250th anniversary of America. The Trump administration and Republicans are already prepared to like banners and tanks and everything is amazing and this country could not be better. And we have to tell the truth about what was and what is. And that's why I'm so excited for your book. So Kyle, your book that's coming out, When We Are Kin, The History and Future of Afro-Indigenous Solidarity. It feels so timely right now. So tell us more about what led you to write this book, and what you're hoping people get from it that is not in a mainstream narrative right now.
Well, the book, people I think are going to be a little salty about this book. In a good way, though, because
it needs to be salty.
I'm being critical. So it's two interventions I'm trying to make and expand the discourse. One is on reparations. Mm-hmm. So when people think of reparations, they think of often wealth building and cash payments. And I'm saying, or like land returns. And a key part of that is upon whose land are you returning? That doesn't mean, for example, Bruce's Beach here in Southern California. That doesn't mean Black people whose land was taken by eminent domain should not be compensated for that. But where's the relationship that you can build between Native peoples? So on the one hand, it's a critique of reparations. And, people will be mad at this, but you can't just focus on wealth building without a critique of racial capitalism.
Yep.
It's completely absurd to say, let's just continue entering into this system that's by nature oppressive and built on the enslavement and dispossession of people. The second thing is sometimes when Native folks talk about land back, they're not thinking also about Black people and how they fit into that narrative. And a major part of some decolonization efforts, sometimes I think decolonization is a metaphor for some folks. They sort of see, especially forms of tribal sovereignty, see the relationship so caught up with the U.S. empire that they're not fundamentally critiquing U.S. empire. And they'll say tribal sovereignty, there's nothing inherently radical about tribal sovereignty. It's not. Like, you actually have to continue to engage in radical practice. And I know that is going to bother and ruffle some feathers, if you will, but I think it's an important narrative to put out, and hopefully we can move forward in a good way. And then finally, I try to provide through this Anishinaabe philosophy around what's called the good life, and like, how do we build more solidarity? I shout out Bliss in there. That's Black Liberation Indigenous Sovereignty, who we just came back from a retreat in New Mexico. Yes. And I was actually, asking for, we need to have more gatherings where you get Black and Indigenous peoples outside of the purview of white supremacy to begin to talk and have real, legitimate, frustrating, but important conversations about how we get our freedom together.
So true. So true. So true. That's why I think people allow themselves to get complicated. I mean, to get distracted by the flash of the money without investigating why that is oftentimes the only kind of remedy for the pain and suffering that we've all endured, our ancestors have endured. Yeah. As Brea mentioned, the 25th anniversary of the United States is coming up around the corner. How do you envision solidarity for our communities that can be leveraged in the moment? And how do we continue to resist side by side, especially as we know that the Trump administration is going to continue to look for ways to divide and conquer, but also to put all of us in a position where we're kind of overwhelmed by our own tragedy that we forget about what's happening with our neighbor and the people down the street.
I mean, one thing even in the book that I conclude with is, so for example, my family were Bear Clan. There's a lot of Bear Clan, or Makwa Dodim as we call it. Mm-hmm. And the clan system is like a kinship thing. So, if I know someone's a part of the Bear Clan, they're basically a cousin or a relative, and I have to treat them as such. But the clan system was meant to show people like to designate responsibilities within that community. Mm-hmm. Right? And we know historically they would look at Scottish people and say, oh, you have a clan, like you have an indigenous clan, or they created clans for diplomacy. So what would it look like for, especially in this time, for tribal nations, whatever their kinship or clan system, however it works, if they do have one, what would it look like to adopt and become relatives with Black people in a very ceremonial, but in a very material way, so we can all live on this land together and imagine our futures? Because for me, it requires kinship. Like I always say with people in my personal life, we either can or we ain't. Like I'm like, we just become family or we're just associates and cool. I don't really have friends. We're kin or we're not. Yeah. Right. And to me, that's how I like build relationships with people. So when we argue, mess up, and when white supremacists like Donald Trump continue to try to divide us, like giving money to HBCUs, like during the universities things and tribal colleges, and then people looking at that crazy, that's just a classic divide and conquer tactic, but we have to resist that. And for me, kinship is an essential part of doing so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I love and appreciate you naming it like that. We're going to need that more than ever, because I think there's a big difference between saying I stand with this group and I have no relationship to anyone in that group. I have to see you and know you to really fight for you. I don't have to be personally impacted by what is going on, but we have to wrestle with things, and digital platforms are not the spaces for us to do it. Like That's we right. can't get on Twitter and Instagram and think that we're going to build solidarity. Like I can learn something about your group. I can follow the right people and get like glimpses into something, but we have to be and share space with one another. And I think that's going to be really, really important, is like, do you actually know and love someone from the group that you're fighting for, so that when shit hits the fan, you're not wondering like, well, I wonder what they need from me. You know, it reminds me of like in 2020, it's like, I felt like every Black person was getting texts from their white friends like, hey, Black Square, can I buy you coffee? Like people just didn't know what to do. And it was like, clearly the relationships are not real enough for conversations and for you to understand how to wade this water with me. And as the water gets more troubled, more intense, more scary, the headlines get more just like everything becomes so all consuming. If we don't have anything real, that thin ice is going to break. And so we have to have a stronger foundation to stand on. So I just appreciate you naming all of this. And I hope to see you continuing to teach and lead and write and curate spaces for us to have these sort of conversations. But before we let you go, let the people know, where can they stay connected to your work? Where can they follow you? Where can they pre-order your book? Like all of the things.
Well, I'm anti-Amazon, of course. We should still be boycotting them for engaging in the genocide in Palestine. But, you can order from Haymarket. Go straight to the website or go to your local big bookstore. So one of my favorite ones is Reparation Club in LA. So wherever your local bookstore is, and you can go pick up and pre-order that book or an Afro-Indigenous history.
Awesome. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for joining us on The Other Side of Change. We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back. You're watching On the Other Side of Change, only on the Black Star Network.
Hatred on the streets, a horrific scene, a white nationalist rally that descended into deadly violence.
White people are losing their damn minds.
As an angry pro-Trump mob storms the U.S. Capitol, we've seen shots.
We're about to see the rise of what I call white minority resistance. We have seen white folks in this country who simply cannot tolerate Black folks voting.
I think what we're seeing is the inevitable result of violent denial.
This is part of American history. Every time that people of color have made progress, whether real or symbolic, there has been what Carol Anderson at Emory University calls white rage as a backlash.
This is the rise of the Proud Boys and the Boogaloo Boys. America, there's going to be more of this.
Here's all the Proud Boys, guys.
This country is getting increasingly racist in its behaviors and its attitudes because of the fear of white people.
The fear that they're taking our jobs, they're taking our resources, they're taking our women. This is white fear.
Welcome back to The Other Side of Change, only on the Black Star Network. Solidarity and community are everything. They are essential to our survival. We need one another, and we need to ensure that our accomplices are informed for the fight ahead.
Yeah, so true. I'm so grateful to Kyle for joining on the show. If you're new to his work, buy every single thing he has published, but especially in Afro-Indigenous History of America, and pre-order his soon-to-be-released When We Are Kin, but you heard the man, do not buy it from Amazon. You can also support people and organizations like Kyle online, follow groups like BLISS, Black Liberation, Indigenous Sovereignty, Indian Collective, NDN Collective, Movement for Black Lives, Decolonizing Wealth, and others who are bridging the divides between our two groups.
Happy Indigenous People Month in advance. You've been watching The Other Side of Change, only on the Black Star Network. Until next time, keep fighting.